All right, everyone, welcome. We'll give people a couple more minutes to join, and I'll set up a few things on my end, but happy to see everyone here. It's going to be an awesome couple of days. And just to get out in front, we'll mention this in the slides, but the recordings will be available. We'll upload them to YouTube, so it might be a day or two, but they will be there. All right, great to see more people trickling through. Let me see here. Awesome, we'll give people like 1 or 2 more minutes. All right. Another minute or two and we'll get going. All right, well, I think we will kind of kick things off. I'm sure some people will continue to trickle in, but we can get going. So firstly, thanks everyone for joining today. This will be the first of 3 days for Prompt Lab. If you were here when we did this back in November of 2023, it will be a similar kind of format, but basically roughly 45 minutes, be very interactive. We'll look at a lot of prompts. We'll be sharing a lot of links to examples that live inside Prompt Hub and stuff from our blog and recent learning. So also the recordings will be uploaded afterwards. Q&A should be open. I believe the chat is open, but the Q&A should definitely be open. So if you have questions throughout, you can let me know and drop it in there. And I'll do my best to keep an eye on it while we're cycling through here. All right, well, welcome to day one. So as I mentioned, recordings will be shared. It might not be daily, it might be like a day or two after. They'll be all uploaded to YouTube. There'll be a whole playlist with them and everything. And so that will be that. Feel free to drop questions in the chat, which should be enabled. I can double check that real quick. Okay, looks good. So today, tools you need, basically just computer, a Prompt Hub account, which is free. So you can just go to our site, prompthub.us, get started if you don't already have one. But we'll be looking at a few examples in there, so it might be helpful to have that. And so part of joining Prompt Hub means you get this awesome cool badge. So basically do it. You've registered, which you're already done if you're here. At least attend one of the sessions, which you've already done if you're here. And then just add a couple of the prompts that we use to your library and Prompt Hub. So, and then once that's done, towards the end of the week, it might spill over to next week, but you'll get a badge added to your profile. So today, we'll talk a little bit kind of just at a higher level of why prompt engineering still matters. And if it does, and what it kind of looks like in 2025 versus what it looked like even last year. We'll look at some of the fundamentals, and then we'll look at meta prompting is something we'll take a peek at as well. And then we'll leave some time at the end for Q&A. I see Tobias said the chat isn't open. I'll try and double check that, but yeah, at least for now, the Q&A is there, so we'll probably just lean on that. But thank you for noting that, Tobias. So, and just also at a high level, our goal here is to help you get better outputs. That's kind of what we've always set from the beginning. And that's really what it comes down to when you're thinking about prompt engineering. So our definition, which we used 2 years ago, which we still use today, is basically improving the inputs to get better outputs from a large language model. Could technically be from a different type of language model, but that's generally what we're thinking about here, is how can we craft better inputs to get more closer to the outputs that we want. And so why prompt engineering? Why does it matter? And so I think if you're in here, you've probably worked on projects. And so, this is a little bit preaching to the choir to a degree, but it's more than just, I would say writing plain English. What makes prompt engineering challenging, even as models continue to get better, is really, I think, putting a lot of the context that's in your head into a chat window. I think we underestimate how much context is behind or stored in our head that we don't even realize, and getting that all down can be very challenging. And so generally speaking, continuing on this idea of, why prompt engineering. So I think there's generally 3 major ways to kind of optimize LLM performance. So prompt engineering, of course, RAG, and then fine tuning. And I think prompt engineering is just a great starting point. It's the most accessible, it's easiest to get up and running with. And it's from there where you can test and evaluate and see if you even need to do anything else. We like to preach simplicity with LLM setups and projects, and really trying to spend a lot of time in the prompt engineering area, because once you start to get to these other areas, it becomes much more complex very quickly. And so this is a graphic that we've used for over 18 months. It came from OpenAI originally. I think it still holds true for today. And if you're raising your hand, I would just drop the message in the chat, or excuse me, in a question in the Q&A. And so, prompt engineering, I think, actually does come down to being more than just a prompt. It's kind of the system around it as well. So there's, I'd say, a little bit of software engineering wrapped up into it, how you architect the system, how you put the right context in the right place, and so on and so forth. As models get better, I think prompt engineering actually becomes more important, because you need to be more specific, because we're going to be using them more and more. So the more you use something, the more important the kind of configuration is as you continue to leverage it deeper into your systems. Let's see, Jeremy, so you dropped a message in here. Are we going over the differences in prompting between reasoning models and text predicting models? I think the reasoning model stuff is day 2. I would need to double check that, but we will be going over that at some point. We have a blog post for that on our blog as well. And speaking of kind of reasoning versus text, normal non-reasoning models, regardless of the model you're using, nothing is going to be clear, detailed instructions. And I think clear and detailed are really the operative words there. And we'll talk about a bunch of different methods, and a lot of them are great, a lot of them are helpful, but nothing will beat this, going back kind of to basics. And a little like litmus test I like to run is that if you're working on some prompt person like inside of your product or something for your app, is to have a colleague read it over and see if they can understand like what you want, what the instructions are. Like if they had to go out and carry out that task, what would they do? It could be a good idea just to give you a second kind of opinion of like, oh, it actually was really unclear to me, or that was not. So I think that really is what it comes down to. And then this has become less important, but I think it's still like a pretty important rule. So giving the model room to think is basically just means you don't want to be overly restrictive in what you're telling the model to output things as. So for example, if we're saying, hey, what's the best language for web development? It really depends on the use case. And so you want to be able to let the model explore those different options. And this is actually, this kind of screenshot on the side is from a research paper where they had the output format restricted versus just open. So JSON versus open. And they found that forcing the model to be even just in a specific structure could lead to worse performance. And so this is especially gets more important as the models get smarter. I think we can be like lean a little bit more on them in terms of the path they want to get to the answer. You still need to be very detailed about what you want to give, but in terms of how it gets there, being less opinionated on that. MJ, in terms of your point, will we go over prompting with different LLMs and how they kind of differ? We will be touching on that throughout. And so at the top, in terms of methods, generally today, and I think overall, I think there's basically two methods that have like actually really proved to be well. And one of those few shot prompting, the other is chain of thought, but we'll start with few shot. Few shot is basically when you insert examples into your prompt. And so this is an example of like a classifier. So this is all one prompt. So, and I'm basically saying, I'm giving the models examples of how we want to classify movie reviews. So movie was good, that's positive. Movie was bad, that's negative. I like the movie, but the ending was, lacking, that's neutral. And then I love the movie, and then the model fills in the blank there. And so very simple few shot example. And so we have a couple of few shot templates inside of prompt tab. I'm going to pull up these links real quick. Move that over to. I guess the chat isn't open yet, but we'll see. If you can get, I think you guys should be able to see that, but basically I'll drop some links to the templates that we touch on. This is a combination of few shot and chain of thought, which you can check out on your own time. An example of how, like how many examples should you have is a question that we hear sometimes when thinking about few shot prompting. And basically you don't want to have like more than, I would say, like 5. At some point it becomes like too much for the model, and the results plateau anyways. And so I think you can get really far with just an example or two. This is another example. You could disregard the header, but another example of using few shot prompting is for content creation. So in this prompt, we're saying, hey, your job is to create content for our client. Here are a few examples that we've created in the past. So based on a brief, here's the content. Based on the brief, here's the content. And then you give the brief, and then it will fill in the content. So it's great for content creation because it's really good at kind of show, don't tell, right? Instead of I could try and figure out how to explain my client's like tone and style and all these things, but it's usually just kind of easier to say, hey, here's an example that came from this brief. And then the model can understand the tone and structure and things along those lines from that. And so touching on, Jeremy, a little bit to your point before about reasoning versus text predicting models, we are touching on a few of that now, actually. So one specific thing with few shot to keep in mind is that there have been multiple papers that have basically shown that few shot prompting with reasoning models maybe isn't as effective as it was with non-reasoning models. And so this one specifically comes from, this is a Microsoft paper, and basically they tested some framework they have, but the long of it is when they started adding multiple examples, so that's 5 shot over here, the performance decreased with a reasoning model. When they did this with a regular GPT-4o model, it increased. And so this was seen across a couple of different places as well. This was mentioned in the DeepSeek paper. We observed that it's sensitive to prompts, few shot prompting degrades performance. So that's another proof point there. And it comes back to the even original blog post from OpenAI for the O1 preview that basically said when providing context, only give the most relevant. So they basically said limit the context, and this is in relation to RAG, few shot and RAG, or it's like a big overlap. But basically it's the idea is that giving the reasoning models a lot of information might be overpowering in some cases. Just gonna pull up a couple of links to drop in the chat here. This was that content creation one, which could be helpful. Oops. So basic principles, even if you're using a reasoning model, I think if you're just using a couple, you should be okay. This is something you really want to test though. You can do that prompt up, you could do it elsewhere. The example should be diverse. So in that example, when we're looking at the movie classifier, we had a bunch of positives with a bunch of negatives, a bunch of neutrals. You don't want to just have all of one because it could bias the model. Again, positive and negative examples. So you just want to get them diverse, randomly order them if you can, if you're using like a lot of them, and then have them follow a common format if you're really trying to have the model like stick to something. Again, that's kind of like a show, don't tell sort of thing. And so in the past, we kind of saw this before with the few shot chain of thought. People used to use few shot for kind of like challenging reasoning problems. I don't think you really need to do that anymore. I think it's great for content creation. So if you are, again, show don't tell, right? Show the model how you want your outputs to be rather than trying to tell it. Having a few examples that could be helpful. And then if you have like a specific output structure, that could be helpful as well. All right, and we'll move on to chain of thought here. Cool. This. Get several of these links ready. Awesome. So chain of thought. If you haven't heard of it, basically it's when you use prompting to encourage the model to reason before giving an output, essentially. Breaking complex problems down into subtasks and going through those. So this is from the OG chain of thought paper, which is now probably 3 years old, if not 2.5. In this first problem, this is the whole prompt in this first bubble. So we are giving it an example, right? Here's a question, here's an answer. This is an example of a few shot example, right? One shot in this case. And it just says the answer is 11. And then we have the question it wants it to solve, it gives the wrong output. In this case, we add some of the reasoning steps that it got to that answer. So he had 5, blah, 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 5 plus 6 is 11. And so this was especially helpful earlier on when models both weren't at reasoning and or math. It's less important now, but even if you're using like a regular like non-reasoning models, it can be still very, very helpful. And so it helps because it breaks complex problems down. It helps the models kind of give them room to think rather than just having to blurt out an answer as a way to think about it. You can get an idea of like the model's thought process, which is helpful for debugging. Widely applicable, relatively easy to implement with some templates, and pretty straightforward. So these are like the classic kind of chain of thought, like single shot just added on to the end of your prompt phrases. So let's break it down step by step, so on and so forth. And we sent that link earlier in terms of that template. That first link is a few shot chain of thought example. This is similar to the other example we were just looking at as well. And what was cool, and we mentioned this in our in a variety of places on our blog, the DeepSeek actually used, and here's a link to this template. This is the template that the DeepSeek team used to generate the reasoning chains that they then use to train their model. So it's pretty straightforward. The user basically has put its reasoning process between think tags, so then it could do some stuff like extraction with it later, and then answer tags. And then a bunch more, there's this collection in Prompto that has a bunch more of like just general reasoning. They aren't all related to chain of thought. A lot of them are. And so you can check that there as well. And so again, Jeremy, touching on your point or question a little bit in terms of like reasoning versus non-reasoning. Do you need to do chain of thought with reasoning, prompting with reasoning models if they're already kind of doing it? In some cases, it's really not super necessary and can almost lead to worse performance. So what we say is that if you are using a reasoning model, there's no reason for you to try and prompt the model to reason because it's going to do it anyways. And like telling it to do it or like trying to use some of these chain of thought principles in your prompts, it's just unnecessary and could probably just lead to, I would say, like worse effects. And so there's a couple of papers we looked at in terms of reasoning steps and performance. We'll just check out some really cool, what I thought was like some pretty cool pieces of data. And so let's see, this was from, I believe also that same MedPrompt Microsoft paper using a reasoning model. So they had like a quick response prompt and then they had extended reasoning prompt. And you'll see generally when you extend the reasoning, models will do better. So this isn't necessarily chain of thought. Chain of thought and just general reasoning are different. Chain of thought is when you're prompting the model to break things down. In this case, we're just giving the model more time to think. And so we'll look at these two prompt templates because I know it's a little intricate. So the quick response says, hey, respond quickly. We know it's one of these 4 answers. I mean, they do some funny things. I have an emergency, blah, blah, blah. Versus the extended reasoning, take your time. So you can see it's not really, it's like a little bit telling it how to think, think methodically. It's more about you increasing the number of tokens in the reasoning will lead to better results, specifically for reasoning models, but also for non. This was also from the DeepSeek paper, where as the average length of the response, so the more reasoning that it generated when making a response led to better performance. And with OpenAI noted this as well. So generally speaking, if you're using a reasoning model and you want to increase performance, giving it more time to reason, increasing its reasoning through prompt engineering can increase your performance. And to touch on, hey, when should I use one type of model versus the other? It really, comes down to costs and a bunch of other things. But in terms of like just looking at the task itself, I would say if the task has like more than like 5 steps, a reasoning model is a good way to go. We touched on this in our one of our many blog posts on reasoning models. But basically, there was this paper that compared 4.0 and 0.1 on a variety of tasks. And so in tasks that had 5 or more reasoning steps, 0.1 maybe outperformed 4.0. If it was under 5 steps, 0.1 Mendy's advantage was like much smaller. Even then, like very simple tasks, 4.0 was better. So there's this kind of sliding effect where like if it's super simple, it might not be worth throwing like a whole reasoning model at it, where you can just use a more like simple instruct or non-reasoning model. And it's not even related to cost, right? Like this is just related to performance. Let me take a look in the Q&A here. So there was a question around someone saying, hey, I've observed that chain of thought prompting is worse for performance than zero shot for 70B llama and smaller models. Does COT improve performance for models above a certain size? It actually does. We covered this in our chain of thought guide, which I will pull up real quick just to give something else for us to look at. Size. It's a very good question. See if I can find this on the fly. Yeah, here we go. This in the chat. This is from our chain of thought guide. Basically, the original paper said they only saw increased performance once the models were in the 100 billion parameter range. And so maybe that's a good like watermark to kind of think of. There's that guide. Yeah, and if you scroll down to if you just like Command F chain of thought limitations, that's where you will assign that. Then someone said, if the model has reasoning capability, then it's not necessary to use prompts. You don't need to tell it like how to break things down if it's a reasoning model, but instructions to give it room to think. So those are two different things. Room to think versus telling it how to think are two different things. And so you could still give the model room to think, as we saw with this extended versus simple or like quick response one. And then Casey said whether and when to use DSPy. I think we are covering all the meta prompting stuff just in a few slides, so we'll get there in a minute. And thank you for all the questions. Get the rest of these links up. Cool. And then, of course, we were very LLM focused. So if you wanted to use a model to generate the chain of thought for you, you can obviously do that. So a few papers that have done this. We'll be covering one called AutoReason. So basically, user message, there's some formatting. It goes to the LLM. It will generate basically reasoning chains for you based on similar things, and then you'll get a final answer. So we'll look at like a specific example of this. But you can use this in PromptHub. It's really cool. We did a whole paper article on AutoReason as well. You can find on our blog. MJ, yeah, all the links will be in the recording in some capacity. Probably just be in like the description. On the YouTube playlist, maybe it'll also be in the email. But yeah, they're all like all in one place. But yeah, this prompt basically says, hey, you'll formulate chain of thought reasoning traces. It says what chain of thought is. Oop. Let's go back a step. It does a few shot examples with COT. But you'll be given a question, decompose the question to logical reasoning traces. Then it gives examples, and then the user question, and then it will generate those reasoning traces. So the output is the steps itself for this specific task. And we built this into Prompt Hub in the playground. So auto chain of thought. You could basically input your whatever task you are working on, and it'll generate a reasoning chain for you. And we could test this real quick. Cool. So in the playground, if you should hit the enhance button, come down to auto chain of thought, input your task. So I'm gonna say search the latest news on prompt engineering, give me an overview, focus on the last week, and we will generate a reasoning chain for that. And this will, under the hood, basically be running that auto reason template. Overloaded. These come from the model provider, so that's interesting. Try that one more time. Somebody must be using Anthropic a lot. I think we have Anthropic under the hood running here. Or it might be actually be one of Google Gemini models always come out as free, and so we might be hopping on that. But the problem with using the free models is that they often will get overloaded. So we'll see if that runs. Cool. So you can see it creates this chain. So it's going to basically define what a relevant, reliable news source is, filter, look at like platforms like archive, other social media, categorize by findings, and then it'll show you the prompt changes. So like basically just appends these to the bottom. We'll add that chain to the prompt, and then we're good to go. And so now you can run this. So these are free. These are accessible on any plan. Yeah, you can run that, but we aren't going to run the whole thing. Something important, something people are much noting more now that we can see the reasoning change from things like, the full reasoning change from OpenAI, but you can see like a breakdown of the reasoning when using the reasoning models. DeepSeek does this, is that you need to check the reasoning sometimes. Like it might be it's going to a website, but goes to a completely different website. So like these are still important to kind of debug and keep an eye on too, just because to be aware of. All right. And we're moving over to meta prompting. I do see Casey asked a good question. So with LLMs getting smarter day by day, and with multimodal capabilities, do you think prompt engineering will be dead down the road? I would say no. I think it actually gets more important as the models get better. We're going to be leaning more and more on these models to do things, and so their performance becomes more important. And prompt engineering and performance are very aligned. And we ship a bunch of LLM-based features into Prompt Hub, but it still takes a lot of time, I would say, to kind of get things really right. You want to have things constrained. You want good user experience. It's a huge component of that. I'd say in some cases it's much more important than the code that surrounds it. And so, if you're just using ChatGPT daily, maybe it's less important. Maybe some of the older tricks they had to do of tipping the model or whatever go away. But there will always be a frontier here, and people will always be discovering new ways to kind of do this better. And like I said, I think as we use models more, and even as they get smarter, becomes more important. And so we'll be getting to meta prompting now, DSPy related type things. And so what is meta prompting? It's essentially using LLMs to help you create / refine your prompts. And in the same way that you can it's so good to understand the basic principles of software engineering to some capacity, even if you're using things like Lovable or Bolt. It's still good to understand the basics of writing prompts to a degree. And so we actually built a something pretty similar to DSPy inside of Prompt Hub called the Prompt Iterator. It's another thing that you can find through like one of those enhancers that we were just looking at. And basically, it's just kind of like a prompt in Copilot. You have a prompt, you test it, you give it feedback based on the output. Maybe the output's too long, maybe it's too short. Maybe it's putting emojis and you don't want emojis. You give that feedback. Model will generate a new prompt for you, and then you can kind of continue with testing and iterating. It's pretty just fun, I would say, to kind of see what that flow looks like. Whether you like need to be using it like right now, it's kind of dependent on your use case. And then we have a whole bunch of like meta prompting prompts that you can check out. So under the Discover tab, it is a category itself, so you can search through that way, but you can also access it via the link here. And then we also have a blog post that went like super deep on this, which was really fun, which we go deep on DSPy, we go deep on TextGrad, we go deep on APE, so automatic prompt engineering. There's a whole bunch of ones that we checked out, which was one of my more fun posts to write about. And so here is that as well. Generally speaking, we're obviously big proponents of LLMs here. And so we think it's really important to use these wherever you kind of can, whether that's writing, coding, or prompt engineering. And so check out the prompts. We have another prompting tool for just generating prompts. You've probably seen this. If you hit create project, then there's like a generate with AI button. You can put a description, you're good to go. Model provider, it's just because we actually have different prompts that run based on the model. So Jeremy, to your point, we will generate prompts using the best practices of that provider. So there are some differences under the hood in terms of what we have determined as best practices for the different providers. Anthropic has a great one inside of their console. OpenAI has one as well inside their playground that helps you generate the system instructions. And we were actually able to do some prompt injecting to get the instructions behind the system instructions generator. So a couple layers deep in the meta at this point. It's available in PromptHub. I don't think I actually have the link handy here, but basically it's search OpenAI SI generator and you'll find it. Cool. We're kind of getting towards the end here a little bit. So, Casey, I think Casey's question is really something we think about a lot too. And it's something we're seeing actually becoming more and more important. So as the models get smarter, what happens to prompt engineering? I'd say it wasn't super clear, like 8 months ago, 6 months ago. As you're seeing, especially like more like multi-agent systems being built, an agent under the hood is really like very good system instructions and then a bunch of tools. And so writing good prompts will always be important because you need to be able to think about the constraints, the edge cases, how you want to direct your agent, your LLM, your chatbot to handle certain things. And so there'll always be room for testing and iterating and make sure that it's kind of the best it can be. You'll have to do less of the maybe the tricks and the ins and out, but they'll always be super core to whatever LLM based thing you're building. Clear instructions, giving the model room to think. If you can do both of those, then you're in a pretty good spot. Few-shot prompting and chain of thought, I think, are still very good, especially when it comes to content creation. And then chain of thought, less important for reasoning models, but extending the reasoning time that the model has can lead to better performance. Absolutely should leverage LLMs to help you through the process. We looked at tools in PromptHub, we looked at tools elsewhere. And that's how I write my prompts. I use the generator and then I use the iterator to kind of get up and running. And so that was it for today. This was super fun. We touched on a lot of things. I think, Jeremy, to your point, we'll talk a little bit more about different models tomorrow for model selection. And yeah, that will be it. Tomorrow is all about building a prompt library. So it's a little bit more about like helping your team. How to know like what model to select based on whatever you're working on. So Jeremy, I would definitely suggest coming to that. And then we have security related things. And then we're going to be putting together a kind of cool workflow in PromptHub using prompt chains to automate some cool processes using search models and generating LinkedIn posts. And that will be kind of all templates for you guys to get up and running with as well. And yeah, same time tomorrow, same deal, 30 to 45 minutes, depending on when we start and end. Tomorrow's a little bit more workshoppy, so that'll be fun. Yeah, I think that wraps it up for us guys. And let's see, Melissa, why don't you, I see your cue at your question. Why don't you reach out to me, Dan at promptup.us in terms of we want to set up a time to us to talk internally. But this is super fun. I hope you guys got a lot out of it. I'm looking forward to tomorrow as well. And then, yeah, agents is on the third day. Agents, the third day will be a little bit more developer focused. So any last questions, feel free to let me know. I'll check out the chat stuff tomorrow. Maybe I'll find a way to open that up. But if there's any other last questions, feel free to drop them in the chat in the next, 60 seconds or so. And if not, then we will see everyone tomorrow. Same time, 11 a.m. Eastern. All right. That was last call on Q&A. So yeah, we will see everyone then. Bye, guys.